What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special, and tomorrow is Inflation Day. We get the CPI, or the Consumer Pricing Index, for the month of November released tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. And over these last few months, numbers have been creeping up and up and up. And we're starting to see some indicators from government and central bank officials that this number could be really bad tomorrow. You ready? Hit it. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Gamble, and I'm Nobody Special, and we get that monthly read and the CPI index tomorrow, and it looks like we could have a very big number on the way. Now, the market is expecting a read of 6.8% tomorrow for the inflation number. Now, that would be higher than the 6.2% number we got last month. It would actually be a 40-year high. But something tells me even that 6.8% number that the market is expecting is way too low. We're starting to see indicators from government officials that the number might be a surprise to the upside. And there's a couple of things out there that owner's equivalent rent is still lurking, and that could send the number much, much higher. Now, before we get into why I think those numbers are going to come in so high tomorrow, I have to ask folks, could you please inflate that big like button? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell. It helps me to keep these videos coming to you, and I would be forever in your debt. And also, I just figured I'd mention that tomorrow at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be going live. We will live stream the CPI read, so I will give you my reaction in real time, and we'll go through the data just as soon as it comes in together. That will be at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, so have your coffee with me if you want. Now, let's get into the numbers. It is that time. It is time to shrink my big, fat melon of a head. And let's look at some CPI details. Now, first, a real quick review. This is actually the CPI release from last month, the data from October. And last month, I just want to zoom in here and remind you, we had a 6.2% year-over-year number last month and a 0.9% month-over-month increase in consumer price index last month. And just going through here in the first few paragraphs of this, the monthly all-item seasonally adjusted increase was broad-based, with increases in the indexes for energy, shelter, food, used cars and trucks, and new vehicles among the largest contributors. And those are some of the categories we're going to focus on. Since they were the biggest contributors last month, we're going to see what did those things do in November. Maybe they can give us a hint of what the statistics are going to look like. So we're going to focus on energy, in particular oil and natural gas, used vehicles. We'll talk a little bit about food, but the big one is shelter, and in particular that owner's equivalent rent number. And we are so overdue for a huge jump in that owner's equivalent rent number. It should have happened months ago. And if it finally hits in this November CPI number, then it's going to take CPI real high, real fast. Now, first off, I want to talk about a couple of the things. We're starting to hear some whispers from government officials as if they're preparing us for a number to be a lot higher than even the expectations are, right? We've had Jerome Powell recently came out, and he's talking about how they might be accelerating the pace of their taper of asset purchases, that they might go from tapering off $15 billion a month to tapering off $30 billion a month, which would put them on pace to end all of their money printing by March. All right, that is way sooner than the market had previously been expecting. And I'm starting to think maybe Powell got a look at these inflation numbers and realized, hey, the confirmation vote on his reappointment as Fed chair hasn't happened yet. He's only been nominated, so maybe he better start looking like he cares about inflation. And they also put to bed the word transitory, which was basically the Federal Reserve saying, we were wrong about inflation being temporary, so we're not going to say that anymore. And the other thing we got, we're going to shrink my melon again here, because we had this story just came out today, and this has me thinking maybe they've seen something that we haven't seen. Biden administration signals Friday's inflation data could be high. Now, this is in Reuters, dated today. President Joe Biden, bracing for another jump in inflation, sought to reassure Americans on Thursday that rises in energy costs and other key goods were starting to ease, but said the change might not be reflected in November data due on Friday. The consumer price index for November is expected to have risen 6.8% compared with the same month last year. A Reuters poll of economists showed overtaking a 6.2% increase in October, which was the fastest gain in 31 years. So a couple things here. Obviously, Biden appears worried, and he's trying to get out in front of this to soften the blow of, it seems, what he's expecting to be a big number tomorrow. Okay, so there's that. The Biden administration is worried about people's reactions to the numbers tomorrow. Now, keep in mind, inflation, and namely gas prices, It's one of the main reasons behind Biden's sinking poll numbers. Trying not to get too political here, but fact is, inflation is hurting Biden's poll numbers. So he needs to look like he cares about inflation, and he needs to do everything he can to contain people's reaction to inflation. So the fact that this article is coming out here, that they're releasing these sound bites right before the CPI number, okay, that tells me the number might be coming in higher. Now, the other thing he's doing, he's talking here about how rises in energy costs and other goods were starting to ease, but that might not be reflected in the number. So I pulled up some of the data on energy prices, and Biden is correct. So we will see lower energy numbers in future CPI reads, but that may not entirely show up in this number coming out tomorrow. And looking here, this is a chart going back to October for West Texas Intermediate crude, and you can see oil prices really peaked at the end of October. They peaked at around $85, just under $85 a barrel. Now, through the month of November, you'll see that those prices did come down. You know, we started November at about 84, and we ended November after that big Black Friday sell-off down here around $70 a barrel in oil. So we did see about a $15 sell-off in oil prices across the month of November, but I'm not sure when they actually took that data point, right? Is this an average across the whole month, or did they take the data point in the beginning of the month, in the middle of the month, the end of the month? I'm really not sure the granularity of the data here, but suffice it to say, it looks like this big sell-off in oil may not be fully accounted for in this CPI reading that's coming up, and Biden would just like to remind us all of that before these lousy numbers come out tomorrow. That's my theory. All right, now if you can see where we are here, oil's been pretty volatile so far in the month of December, but we are pretty much right about where we ended November at, so I'm not sure that future months are really going to show that big a change when it comes to oil. Now, natural gas, that's something different entirely, because we have had so far a very warm fall here in the United States. Now, here we have natural gas prices going back to the end of October, and you can see gas prices have really been trending down, down, down for the better part of 2 months now. Natural gas started the month of November right here around 567 per million BTUs, and they ended November, again, we had that big Black Friday sell-off, they ended November around 445. So we did see a pretty good decline in natural gas prices, but prices have declined significantly further. We're down around 378 now. This recent bit of sell-off will definitely not show up in the CPI read tomorrow. So Biden is correct. There will be some relief in the energy department in future CPI numbers. How much remains to be seen still. But the fact is, energy prices have come down in the last 2 months. Now, one of the other big categories that hit CPI an awful lot was used vehicle prices, and by default, new vehicle prices because of the chip shortage. And I just want to show you here, this is the Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index here. Let's bring my melon down here so you guys can see a little better. And focusing in here really on just 2021, you can see the price of used vehicles has just gone up, up, up. A couple of little blips here, but pretty much up and straight up for the whole year of 2021. That number continues to rise in these most recent months, now at 232. Now remember, this is a year-over-year change, right? So we're going back to the end of 2020 for the comparison in these CPI numbers. And look, folks, we've still got some really, really big moves in the index for vehicles. So the used vehicle variable, and by connection, the new vehicle, look, these prices are going to keep going up. So this is going to keep getting worse in the CPI read. So that's another thing that tells me the numbers might be worse than the market is expecting. But by far, the single biggest variable, the most important input to CPI is something that's called owner's equivalent rent. Right? Owner's equivalent rent makes up about 24% of the whole index. Nothing else even comes close. Not any kind of energy, not food. By far, the index for shelter is the biggest component, and owner's equivalent rent makes up almost the entirety of that shelter aspect of CPI. Now, owner's equivalent rent has barely moved all year long, even though house prices have gone straight up and rents have gone straight up. Owner's equivalent rent still has not moved in the CPI calculations, which has a lot of people referring to CPI as CP lie, accusing the Fed of covering up the actual increases in housing prices. Now, I'd stop short of accusing them of trying to cover it up, although I wouldn't put it past them, because there is historical precedent that says large jumps in housing costs don't always show up in owner's equivalent rent right away. Usually takes between 9 months to a year and a half. Well, it's now been about a year and a half since this monster bull run in housing has started. So we are overdue for a big jump in owner's equivalent rent. And remember that owner's equivalent rent is that most important variable in the calculation. And that is the one that may give us the big surprise tomorrow. And I just want to shrink me here again and get into some of the detail about why I'm saying that. Now, I have to say, folks, I have been calling for a big jump in owner's equivalent rent for months, right? Really since August or September, I've been saying owner's equivalent rent is going to take CPI higher, and it hasn't happened yet. But it is a mathematical certainty. At some point, owner's equivalent rent is going to go up. Now, keep in mind, owner's equivalent rent, not a scientific poll. The Federal Reserve calls up homeowners, and they say, how much would you rent your house for? And they say, oh, I'd rent it for about this. And they say, okay, got it. Thank you for your time. That's really how they calculate it. So it takes time for these big moves in home prices to show up in owner's equivalent rent. But here we go. This is looking at CNBC just 2 days ago. Apartment rent and occupancy hit record highs even as market enters its traditionally slow season. Apartment rent and occupancy set new records in November, even as the rental market headed into its traditionally slow season. The annual increase in asking rents for new move-in leases hit 13.9%. That is a huge spike in rental costs. And if you ask anybody, that's probably what they're going to tell you. Not the 0.4% number that the CPI is telling us the rent has gone up. That 13.9% number, that's a little more realistic. And sooner or later, owner's equivalent rent is going to hit a number like that. It's not going to stay at the fraction of 1% for much longer. And just for a little historical context here, I want to show you this chart. Now, this is on CoreLogic. What we're looking at here is the single-family rent index compared to CPI owner's equivalent rent of residences. Now, the single-family rent index is in blue, and CPI owner's equivalent rent is in orange. What I want to draw your attention to is look at all of these big moves in single-family rent index over the last few years. This is going back to 2005. Look here. We've got a big move in single-family rent index, right? But if you'll notice, it took about 9 months for that move to show up in owner's equivalent rent. It's interesting. We have a delayed reaction. First, the rents go up. A few months later, CPI says the rent has gone up. Let's look around 2009, 2010, and we get the same thing. Look at this big jump in owner's equivalent rent, and then it was 12 months later that we got a corresponding move in CPI. Even here, it's been 9 months, right? Now, this article was dated back in September, so even this is 2-month-old data. But look what we got here. We have this monster move in home prices across all of 2020 and into 2021. Now, this move has continued. It's beginning to slow, but prices are still going up. And look, owner's equivalent rent has only just begun to tick up. What we're going to see very soon is owner's equivalent rent is going to start steepening and rising commensurate with this big run in home prices. And I would also keep in mind that once that turn starts, once owner's equivalent rent starts moving up, you can see it continues for almost a year and a half. So we're looking at big inflation numbers, not just this month, not just last month, not just next month. We're looking at some seriously monster inflation numbers for probably the better part of the next year, because this big run in home prices has not even begun to show up in the CPI index. And that's why I think we're looking at a CPI possibly even higher than 7% tomorrow. So long story short, there's just too many variables that go into CPI to really give you an accurate prediction and say, I think it's going to come in at this point, this. All right? There's just so many inputs to this number: the food, the energy, the shelter, the car vehicles, hotels, restaurants. Everything is an input. But all of the main factors that have been driving increases in CPI lately, like shelter, like vehicles, like food, they continue to rise. Energy has come down a little bit in the last month, but I really doubt that the decrease in energy that we saw in November is going to be anywhere near enough to offset the long overdue increase in owner's equivalent rent. Remember, owner's equivalent rent counts for almost a quarter of the CPI. And once that one statistic gets moving, inflation is headed higher and it's going to keep going higher. So the fact that the Fed is now talking about increasing the pace of taper, and that Joe Biden is out here saying, don't worry, folks, these energy price decreases aren't going to show up in the November numbers, combined with some of the granularity I just gave you now, all that combined tells me we're looking at a big read tomorrow. I think, personally, we're coming in above 7% on CPI. Now, that would be a big monster jump. Keep in mind, we were just 6.2 last month. But if that owner's equivalent rent kicks in, we're looking at a CPI read higher than 7%. Anyways, folks, I've been saying that for a couple months now, and it hasn't happened yet. So maybe owner's equivalent rent comes in low again. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Again, we are going to do a live stream tomorrow. We're going to start at 8:15 a.m. Eastern time. So we will live stream. We'll go over some of this data before the numbers come out, and then we'll bring it up live right as the numbers come out and dig into the report and give you my reaction. And also tomorrow afternoon is my regular weekly live stream at 3:15 p.m. for Power Hour. We're going to do that. So we will be going live twice tomorrow. Hope to see you guys there. Guys, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget, inflate that like button, subscribe to my channel, hit that notification bell. It really helps me out, and I'd be forever in your debt. Helps me to keep this channel growing. Till next time, live small, dream big.